The Apache woman chained to his fence begged, "Do whatever you want," but he slowly freed her instead. At the edge of a small settlement near the outskirts of a ranch, a woman was chained to a rough wooden fence. Her clothing was torn and dusty, and her hair, tangled from days without care, fell over her shoulders in matted strands. She shifted slightly, the chains digging into her wrists, and looked around with wide, cautious eyes. Every movement, every sound seemed to heighten her fear. She was alone, far from anyone who could help, and yet her spirit had not entirely broken. From the distance, a man appeared, walking slowly along the dirt path leading to the ranch. He was a rancher in his late 40s, strong from years of hard labor, but with lines of weariness etched deeply into his face. His boots kicked up clouds of dust with each step, and the wide-brimmed hat on his head shaded his eyes. He noticed the woman chained to the fence almost immediately, and a mixture of shock and concern froze him in place for a moment. He had seen many things in his life, but the sight of a woman in such a state made his heart tighten. The woman noticed him too. At first, she stiffened, unsure whether he was friend or foe. Her eyes, dark and alert, studied him carefully. Her lips trembled slightly as she spoke, her voice raw and hoarse. "Do whatever you want," she said, her tone almost detached but laced with desperation. She did not fight him, did not flinch further. Instead, she seemed to surrender herself to the unknown, hoping, perhaps, that fate would be kinder than the people who had chained her here. The man paused, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to run, to call for help, or even to leave her as she was. Stories of Apache women and the struggles of the land had filled his childhood, tales of bravery, survival, and occasional betrayal. But he could see her vulnerability clearly now. She was not a symbol of a distant legend or story. She was a real person, alive and in need of help. He could not ignore her. He approached slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. The woman flinched at first, but when he spoke gently, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, curiosity perhaps, or a small measure of hope. "You don't have to stay like this," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the wind and the distant sounds of the ranch animals. She studied him carefully. Her life had taught her to be cautious, to measure every word and action before trusting anyone. And yet something about his calm demeanor, the steady way he approached, suggested he might be different from those she had known before. He crouched slightly, careful not to make sudden movements. "Can I help you get free?" he asked softly. The woman looked at him, her lips parting slightly, as if she wanted to speak but could not find the words. Finally, she shook her head slightly, a silent refusal. Her eyes, however, betrayed a hint of hope, a fragile thread of trust she was not ready to admit openly. The rancher noticed the chains first, thick iron links that had left red marks on her skin. They were heavy, binding her wrists to the fence with unyielding force. He could see the pain etched in the lines of her hands and arms. Without touching her, he began examining the locks, trying to see if there was a safe way to remove them without causing further harm. Every step he took was deliberate, every motion cautious. He did not want to frighten her or make her feel as though she had to defend herself again. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked, his voice gentle. The woman did not answer immediately. She had learned long ago that words could betray you, and she was careful with every sound she made. Finally, in a whisper, she admitted, "A little. They didn't feed me for days." Her eyes dropped to the ground. The man's chest tightened. Hunger, fear, and isolation had taken a toll on her, yet she remained upright, defiant in her own quiet way. He looked around the area, noting the lack of immediate danger. The ranch was quiet, the few animals grazing in the distance oblivious to the human drama unfolding nearby. This isolation worked in their favor. No one would rush in unprepared, no one would disturb the fragile trust being built between them. He felt a strange mixture of responsibility and resolve. He could not leave her here. Not now. Not ever. For the next few minutes, he simply sat a short distance away, not too close, not too far. He spoke softly about the ranch, the animals, and the weather, trivial things, but enough to begin breaking the wall of fear between them. The woman listened, her eyes flicking up occasionally, studying his face for signs of deceit or threat. She remained silent for the most part, but the faintest tremor of acknowledgement passed through her, a subtle sign that perhaps, just perhaps, she could trust him. The rancher noticed the small changes, the way she relaxed her shoulders slightly, the way her gaze lingered on him for a fraction longer than before. These were tiny victories, almost invisible to the casual observer, but monumental in this delicate dance of trust. He did not rush her. He knew that freedom could not be forced. It had to be offered gently, carefully, and with patience. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The woman shifted, the chains clinking softly, but she did not pull away. She watched him, her expression a mixture of caution and curiosity. The man extended a hand not to touch her but to offer reassurance. "I'll help you," he said simply, "but we have to go slow. You need to decide each step." Her eyes widened slightly at his words. It was the first time someone had acknowledged her autonomy in days, perhaps weeks. The phrase, "do whatever you want," had once been her surrender, her acknowledgement of despair. Now, the man's words suggested something entirely different: hope, choice, and a chance to reclaim control over her life. They stayed like that for hours, the silence punctuated only by the occasional gust of wind and distant animal sounds. Neither spoke much, but a subtle understanding grew between them. The rancher recognized the courage it took for her to remain present despite the chains, despite the fear. She, in turn, began to sense the sincerity in his calm presence, a rare quality in a world that had often been harsh and unyielding. As night fell, the first stars appeared in the vast desert sky. The woman leaned back slightly against the fence, exhausted but alive. The rancher remained nearby, watching, ensuring she felt safe. He could have gone inside, left her to the night, but something within him, perhaps empathy, perhaps a sense of moral duty, kept him there. He understood that true freedom began not just with removing chains, but with restoring trust, and that process could not be rushed. The first part of their story ended not with dramatic action, but with quiet anticipation. The woman remained chained but aware of a possibility she had not felt in a long time, the possibility that someone might care, that someone might act with patience and kindness rather than cruelty or indifference. And for the rancher, the encounter planted a seed of responsibility, a realization that sometimes courage is not only in saving oneself, but in choosing to help another human being in their darkest hour. The desert night was calm, the air cool after the harsh heat of the day. The stars above shone like tiny lanterns scattered across a dark canvas. The rancher sat a short distance from the fence, careful not to make her feel crowded. He could see the outline of the woman, still chained, still tense, but there was a subtle shift in her posture. She was no longer rigid with fear, though caution remained. For a long time neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, it was a quiet understanding, a delicate bridge forming between them. The rancher thought about the stories he had heard as a boy, tales of the Apache people, their strength, their resilience, and the hardships they endured. Those stories had always been distant, abstract. Now he saw them in her eyes, in the quiet dignity with which she bore her chains. It made him realize that she was not weak, not helpless. She was courageous, even in her suffering. Finally, he spoke softly, his voice gentle, careful not to startle her. "You must be hungry," he said, glancing toward a small basket of food he had brought. He had packed some bread, dried fruit, and water. "I brought something to eat. You don't have to take it if you don't want to." The woman's eyes flicked toward the basket, then quickly back at him. She did not speak, but the smallest twitch of her hand suggested curiosity. She had learned not to trust easily. Kindness could be a trap, a way for someone to control her again. But the simplicity of his gesture, the way he had not thrown the food at her feet or demanded gratitude, made her pause. Slowly, carefully, she reached for a piece of bread. Her hands shook slightly as she tore a small portion, and she ate in silence, her eyes never leaving him. He watched her closely, careful not to make any sudden movements. "I don't mean to scare you," he said after a while. "I just want to help." Her gaze softened slightly, though skepticism remained. She had lived long enough to know that people could be kind one moment and cruel the next. But the patience in his voice, the careful way he had approached her, planted a seed of trust. She had not experienced this in a long time, and it was disorienting, yet quietly comforting. As she ate, he spoke more about the ranch. He described the animals, the cows, the horses, the chickens, and the daily routines he followed. It was mundane information, but it served a purpose. It showed her that life continued beyond her chains, that there was a world where things moved at their own pace and where care and responsibility existed. She listened in silence at first, then occasionally asked questions in a low, hesitant voice. "Do the horses sleep outside?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse, but there was a flicker of curiosity, a sign that she was slowly allowing herself to engage. "Yes," he replied gently. "Some stay in the barn, but most like the open field. They enjoy the night air." His words were simple, yet deliberate, meant to show her that not everything was dangerous, that not all people or creatures posed a threat. For hours, they remained in this careful rhythm. He offered food, water, and gentle conversation. She began to relax in small ways. Her shoulders lowered slightly, her breathing became less tense, and for the first time in days, she leaned back against the fence instead of bracing herself against it. The chains were still there, heavy and cold, but her spirit was subtly shifting. She was beginning to believe, just a little, that freedom might be possible. The rancher noticed every small change. To an outsider, it might have seemed insignificant, but to him, these were victories. Every movement of trust, every question she asked, was a step toward healing. He knew he could not force her to move faster than she was ready. Trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. He had to be patient, and he was willing to wait. At one point, he decided to try something different. He reached for a small wooden stick, carving it slowly with a knife to make a smooth handle. "I like to carve sometimes," he said, showing her the process. "It helps me think." "Do you want to try?" Her eyes widened slightly at the offer. She had never been asked to participate in something so simple, something so ordinary, without fear of punishment or trickery. She shook her head gently, unsure. But the gesture itself mattered. It was another thread of trust being woven between them. He continued working quietly, carving shapes and patterns into the wood. The sound of the knife against the stick was rhythmic, almost meditative. After a while, she leaned slightly forward, curiosity overtaking caution. How do you make it smooth?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "Little by little, you take your time, be patient, and you don't rush. Everything gets smoother eventually." His words carried a quiet wisdom, one that she felt in her bones. It was not just about carving wood. It was about life, about freedom, about slowly reclaiming control over what had been taken from her. As the night deepened, the air grew cooler, and the sounds of the desert night became more pronounced. Crickets chirped, a coyote howled in the distance, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the brush reminded them both that life continued beyond their immediate struggle. The woman shifted again, more comfortably this time. She began to speak a little, telling fragments of her story. They didn't care," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They chained me, left me, like I was nothing." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she did not cry. The rancher remained silent, letting her speak without interruption. He did not offer pity or judgment, just presence, and that was enough for her in that moment. She paused, taking a deep breath. I don't trust easily," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I shouldn't even be talking to you. I understand," he said softly. "You don't have to trust me all at once. Just know that I won't hurt you. You can decide everything at your own pace." The honesty in his words seemed to reach her. It was the first time in days that she felt her voice mattered, that her choices mattered. She looked at him for a long moment, trying to read the sincerity in his face. There was no trickery, no hidden agenda, just calm, steady human care. Hours passed, and though the chains still bound her wrists, something else began to loosen, the weight on her heart. She realized that fear, though powerful, did not have to control her every thought. There could be small acts of kindness, small moments of understanding that slowly rebuilt the broken pieces of her trust. The rancher continued his careful approach, never pushing, never demanding. He brought more water, offered another piece of bread, and kept speaking gently about ordinary things, animals, the sky, the weather, the simple routines of ranch life. Each word, each gesture was a quiet promise. She was not alone and she was safe. By the time the first light of dawn began to glow on the horizon, the woman had changed subtly but unmistakably. She sat up straighter, her gaze less wary, her breathing steadier. The chains remained, but they no longer seemed to define her entirely. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes, a sense that freedom might not be as distant as it had seemed. The rancher stood up, stretching, careful not to startle her. "Rest now," he said gently. "We'll take small steps slowly. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." She nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement, and leaned back against the fence once more. For the first time in days, she felt a small measure of peace. The road ahead would be long, and the chains would not vanish immediately. But she had glimpsed a different path, a path where patience, care, and quiet determination could lead to freedom. And the rancher, watching her, felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes helping someone was not about grand gestures or dramatic actions. It was about patience, presence, and the courage to offer trust when it was needed most. The morning light crept slowly over the desert, painting the land in soft golden tones. The cool air carried a faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth. The woman remained by the fence, the chains still binding her wrists, but the tension that had gripped her the previous day had eased slightly. She shifted uncomfortably, testing the weight of her bonds, yet a quiet calm seemed to surround her. The rancher approached carefully, carrying a small tin of water and a piece of cloth he had soaked to clean her wounds. He did not rush, did not speak harshly, for he understood that trust could not be hurried. "I brought you something to help," he said softly. "Your wrists are sore. This should make it easier." The woman looked at him, wary at first, then hesitated before nodding. She allowed him to gently wipe the dirt and dried blood from her wrists. The chains, though heavy, no longer seemed like instruments of hopelessness. They were reminders of patience, of gradual steps toward freedom. The rancher worked quietly, carefully, making sure every motion was deliberate, slow, and comforting. Once her wrists were cleaned, he stepped back and smiled gently. "How does that feel?" he asked. "A little better," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady. It was the first time she had admitted relief in words, rather than silently enduring pain. The rancher nodded, sensing that small victories like this were monumental in her journey. He decided that the next step was to help her regain a sense of autonomy. "You can move your hands a little now," he said, "but slowly. You control everything." She hesitated, then gingerly shifted her hands, feeling the chains loosen slightly as he adjusted them carefully. Her eyes watched him intently, measuring his actions, and he met her gaze with unwavering calm. As the sun rose higher, the woman began to speak more freely. She told him about her life before the chains, about her family, the people she had trusted, and the ones who had betrayed her. Her voice wavered at times, but she spoke with honesty, revealing pain she had carried silently for years. The rancher listened quietly, never interrupting, allowing her to tell her story at her own pace. They They didn't care if I lived or died, she said softly. They left me here because I resisted. I had no choice. I had no one. Her words were heavy, filled with sorrow, yet the act of speaking them aloud brought a sense of release. The rancher nodded gently, acknowledging her suffering. I hear you, he said softly, and I want to help, but I won't rush you. You decide what happens next. There was a pause, filled only with the sounds of the desert, the distant call of a bird, the rustling of small animals through the brush. Then she asked a quiet question, almost as if testing him. Why are you helping me? You don't have to. I help because it's the right thing to do, he replied simply. No one deserves to be treated like this, and no one should have to face the world alone when help is possible. His words were steady and true, and she felt their sincerity. Slowly, a glimmer of trust began to shine through her guarded eyes. The rest of the morning passed in a careful rhythm. He brought her food and water, spoke about ordinary things, how the animals were fed, how the land was cared for, and small routines of daily life. The woman listened and occasionally asked questions. Her curiosity began to grow, small cracks appearing in the walls she had built around herself. By midday, the rancher suggested a small walk. I can bring a blanket and let you sit in the sun, he said. You don't have to go far, just enough to feel the warmth and fresh air. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. It was a small step, but for her it was monumental, a chance to reclaim a piece of freedom in a controlled, safe way. He carefully adjusted the chain so she could move without strain, then led her a short distance from the fence. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of sand, rocks, and distant mountains. The woman inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. It was a sensation she had almost forgotten, freedom in the simplest form. Her chest rose and fell more evenly as she absorbed the quiet beauty around her. As they returned to the fence, she spoke again, her voice softer this time. I don't know why I trusted you. I shouldn't. You don't have to understand everything now, he said gently. Trust grows slowly like a plant. You nurture it little by little and eventually it blooms. She looked at him, and for the first time she allowed a small, cautious smile. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it carried hope, a fragile, precious hope. Over the next few hours, they continued to build their connection. The rancher brought small comforts, a clean cloth, more water, some food, and spoke gently about the land, the animals, and simple life lessons. He never forced her to move faster than she could handle, never pushed her to speak before she was ready, and never acted impatiently. His patience was a quiet lesson, showing her that not all people sought control or harm. Some offered guidance and safety without strings attached. As the day turned to afternoon, the woman began to share more of her story, revealing details of her life before captivity. She spoke of family, of dreams interrupted by violence and betrayal, and of the constant fear that had accompanied her for as long as she could remember. Each revelation brought a small weight off her shoulders, and the rancher absorbed it all with quiet understanding. You've survived so much, he said softly. You're stronger than you realize. Her eyes flicked up at him, uncertain. Stronger, she whispered. I feel weak. I feel broken. Survival isn't about feeling strong all the time, he said gently. It's about keeping going even when it feels impossible. You've done that. That makes you strong. His words were simple, but they carried weight. She felt the truth in them, a quiet validation of her courage. As evening approached, the rancher suggested they prepare for the night. We'll keep the fire small, he said. You can rest and I'll stay nearby. She nodded, feeling a rare sense of safety. The act of resting without fear was foreign but comforting, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax. Around the fire, the rancher shared small stories from his life, childhood memories, lessons learned on the ranch, and moments of quiet joy. The woman listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just absorbing the warmth of the fire and the calm of his presence. She began to feel a strange sense of companionship, a connection she had not expected in such dire circumstances. Before sleep, the rancher adjusted the chains one last time, ensuring they were loose enough for comfort but still secure for safety. "Rest now," he said softly. "Tomorrow we'll take another small step. You control everything. I'll follow your lead." The woman nodded, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. As she lay down on the blanket he had provided, she felt the weight of her fear lift slightly. The chains still existed, but they no longer felt like a prison in the same way. There was hope, fragile but undeniable, that freedom could come slowly, patiently, and with care. And for the rancher, the day had brought a deeper understanding of what it meant to help someone truly. It was not about heroism or grand gestures. It was about presence, patience, and respect for the person before you. He had seen courage in her, quiet and resilient, and he knew that guiding her toward freedom required the same kind of steady, unwavering courage. As night fell, the desert became still. Stars shone brightly above, silent witnesses to the quiet journey of two people from different worlds finding trust, understanding, and a glimmer of hope in the midst of hardship. The woman slept more peacefully than she had in days, and the rancher remained awake for a while, watching over her, reflecting on the small but significant steps they had taken together. It was clear that the road ahead would be long, but for the first time, both of them could see the possibility of a future where fear did not dominate, where trust could be rebuilt, and where freedom was not just a distant dream but a tangible reality, waiting patiently to be claimed. The next morning the desert was quiet, the air fresh and cool, carrying a faint scent of earth and sagebrush. The woman awoke slowly, blinking at the soft light of dawn as it spilled across the fence and the sand beneath her. She shifted slightly, testing her wrists, which were still bound, though the discomfort had lessened thanks to the rancher's careful care the day before. The chains remained, a constant reminder of her captivity, yet they no longer felt as hopelessly heavy. The rancher approached with a calm, measured pace. In his hands he carried a small toolbox containing simple items: pliers, a hammer, and some spare locks. He had been thinking all night about how to proceed safely, how to give her freedom without causing fear or panic. He understood that the process had to be slow, deliberate, and respectful of her pace. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice gentle. "How did you sleep?" The woman shifted her gaze toward him, cautious but more relaxed than the previous day. "Better," she admitted quietly. "The blanket helped and the fire." Her voice was low but steady, carrying a subtle note of trust. "That's good," he replied. "Today we'll take another step. But only if you're ready. You are in control. I won't do anything without your consent." She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting both curiosity and a hint of fear. The chains had kept her confined for so long that even small movements felt unfamiliar. Yet there was a faint glimmer of hope, a sense that freedom could be approached gently, without force or harm. The rancher knelt beside her and examined the locks closely. "These are heavy, but we can loosen them a little today," he explained. "I'll show you each step before I do anything. You can stop me at any time." Her eyes widened slightly. You won't trick me?" she asked, a note of vulnerability in her voice. "No," he said firmly. "You can trust me, but you decide every step." Carefully, he began to manipulate the locks, showing her how he was loosening the links of the chain bit by bit. The woman watched intently, her hands trembling slightly as she realized that each movement was purposeful and safe. Her chest rose and fell with anticipation, and a faint spark of hope ignited within her. As he worked, they spoke quietly. He asked her about her dreams, what she hoped for once she was free, and the places she had always wanted to see. At first, her answers were cautious, short, and guarded. But slowly, as the minutes passed, she began to open up more. She spoke of the mountains she had once admired from a distance, of rivers she had longed to touch, and of the small joys she had been denied for too long. "You can see them one day," he said gently, "and maybe even walk beside them. But for now, we take one step at a time." Her lips curved slightly in a small, tentative smile. It was the first time she had smiled in days, a smile that carried relief, curiosity, and the faint beginnings of trust. The process of loosening the chains was slow. The rancher worked methodically, adjusting each link with care, explaining each action before touching her wrists. "I'm loosening this part first," he said softly. "You can feel it. Tell me if it's too tight or uncomfortable." She nodded, her hands moving cautiously. The sensation of movement was strange yet comforting, a subtle reminder that her body was capable of control and choice again. The chains still bound her, but they no longer dictated every motion she made. As the morning passed, they continued this careful process. Each small release of the chains became symbolic, a step toward reclaiming autonomy, a demonstration of patience and trust. The rancher spoke quietly throughout, offering encouragement, explaining what he was doing, and allowing her to participate in small ways like moving her hands slightly to test the loosened links. "You're doing well," he said gently. "Every step you take is important. You're in control." Her eyes met his, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel a sense of empowerment. She was not a passive victim, she was an active participant in her own liberation. The realization was subtle but profound. By midday, the chains had been loosened significantly, allowing her to move her hands with more freedom. The rancher paused and stepped back, giving her space. "Do you want to try moving a little on your own?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then slowly lifted her hands, testing the weight and resistance. The movement was awkward but liberating. She let out a small, surprised laugh, the sound light and almost musical. I can move," she said, amazement in her voice. "Yes," he replied, smiling gently. "And soon you'll be completely free, but we'll go at your pace. There's no rush." The afternoon was spent in quiet, deliberate progress. Each link released, each movement gained was a small victory. The rancher continued to provide support without ever forcing her, showing that patience and empathy could achieve more than force or haste. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, the woman began to share more of her past, the hardships, the betrayals, and the moments of courage that had carried her this far. She spoke of nights spent hiding, of days spent fleeing, and of the fear that had always accompanied her. The rancher listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. His presence alone offered reassurance that her story mattered, that her voice had weight. "You've endured so much," he said softly, "and yet you're still here, still standing. That is strength." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. I never thought anyone would help me like this. I always expected anger, cruelty, not kindness." "Kindness is powerful," he replied gently. "It can heal even the deepest wounds, and it begins with patience and respect." As evening approached, the rancher suggested they sit outside for a while, near the edge of the property, where she could see the distant mountains bathed in the soft glow of sunset. She agreed, moving slowly, feeling the chains loosened but still present. The sight of the mountains and the warm light brought a sense of peace she had not felt in a long time. Sitting together in silence, she watched the horizon, the colors shifting from gold to pink to deep purple. The rancher spoke softly, telling her stories of the land, the animals, and the rhythms of the desert. She listened, captivated by the simplicity of it all, by the idea that life could be gentle and beautiful, even after hardship. "You're learning to trust again," he said quietly, "and that is the first step toward freedom, not just of your body but of your spirit." She nodded slowly, understanding the truth in his words. Freedom was not just about removing the chains. It was about regaining control, reclaiming choice, and rediscovering hope. Each careful action he had taken, each gentle word had built a bridge back to her own autonomy. As night fell, the desert grew quiet once more. Stars shone brightly above, reflecting in her eyes as she looked up at the vast sky. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging, not just in the physical world but in the world of human connection. The rancher remained nearby, quietly observing, ready to continue his careful guidance when morning came. Before sleep, he adjusted the chains one last time, ensuring they were loose and comfortable. "Rest now," he said softly. "Tomorrow we'll take another step. You're in control always." She nodded, feeling the weight of her chains lessen not only physically but emotionally. She was moving closer to freedom, step by step, guided by patience, trust, and the quiet strength of someone who believed in her. And the rancher, watching over her, felt a deep sense of purpose. He knew that helping someone reclaim their freedom was not about speed or grand gestures. It was about steady presence, empathy, and respect for the person's pace. Each small movement, each cautious smile, each word of trust was a victory in itself. In the quiet of the desert night, two lives intertwined, one reclaiming freedom, the other learning the power of compassion. The chains were still present, but their meaning had changed. They were no longer symbols of oppression alone. They were markers of progress, patience, and the slow, deliberate journey toward hope. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, spreading its golden light across the rugged landscape. The air was crisp and quiet, filled with the soft sounds of birds singing and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the brush. The woman sat by the fence, her wrists still lightly bound by the chains, but the weight of them no longer felt overwhelming. She had come a long way, both physically and emotionally, and the faintest glimmer of hope now shone brightly in her eyes. The rancher approached quietly, carrying the small toolbox he had used the previous day. He had spent the night planning carefully, thinking about the final steps needed to grant her full freedom. Patience had guided every action so far, and he knew that the moment of liberation had to be handled with the same care. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. "Are you ready for the next step?" The woman glanced at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of anticipation, apprehension, and a newfound trust. I think so," she whispered. The simple words carried a quiet strength, a willingness to move forward despite the fear that still lingered. He nodded gently. "You'll be free soon, but we take it slowly, one step at a time. You are in control." Carefully, he approached the chains and began loosening the remaining links. He showed her each movement before touching the metal, explaining every action and ensuring that she felt safe. The woman watched intently, her hands trembling slightly, but there was no panic. Instead, there was a quiet determination, the courage to reclaim what had been taken from her for so long. As the chains loosened further, she began to test her movements. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her arms, bending them and flexing her fingers. The sensation of freedom, even partial, was both strange and exhilarating. She could feel the control returning to her body, and with it, a sense of empowerment that had been missing for far too long. "You're doing wonderfully," the rancher said softly. "Each small movement is a step toward complete freedom. And remember, you decide everything. I'm just here to help." Her lips curved into a small, cautious smile. It was a smile of disbelief, of relief, and of hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life without chains, without fear, a life where her choices were her own. As the morning progressed, they continued carefully. The rancher explained how he would remove the final links, giving her time to prepare mentally and physically for the moment. "When the last link is undone," he said gently, "you will be fully free. But take a deep breath and know that this is your choice. You have the power to decide when it happens." She nodded, her heart racing, a mixture of excitement and nervousness coursing through her. Slowly, deliberately, he removed the first of the final links. The sound of the metal breaking free was soft but filled the air with a sense of triumph. The woman's hands moved more freely now, the chains falling away, one by one. Each release was symbolic, a reclaiming of autonomy, a restoration of dignity, and a tangible step toward the life she had longed for. When the last chain fell to the ground, She held her hands up, flexing her fingers and stretching her arms. The sensation was incredible, liberating, almost surreal. She looked at the rancher, tears welling in her eyes, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel unreserved joy. I'm free," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes," he said softly, smiling warmly, "you're free, and you earned it step by step." She sank to the ground briefly, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. Her chains were gone, but more importantly, the weight of fear and despair that had burdened her for so long had lifted. She felt light, as if the desert itself had breathed freedom into her spirit. The rancher knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, not to control but to offer support and reassurance. "Take your time," he said. "There's no rush. Freedom can be gentle too. You can stand when you're ready." Slowly she rose to her feet, her body unaccustomed to full freedom after so long of being confined. She stretched, testing her strength, and found it returning with each movement. The desert stretched endlessly before her, vast and open, a world full of possibilities. For the first time she felt as though she belonged, not just in the land but in the world itself. As they walked a short distance from the fence, she breathed deeply, savoring the fresh air, the warmth of the sun, and the quiet beauty of the desert. Each step was deliberate, each movement a celebration of regained control. She looked at the rancher, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for your patience, for your kindness, for not rushing me." He smiled gently. "You did all the hard work. I just helped guide the steps. The courage was always yours." They sat together for a while, watching the mountains in the distance and the colors of the desert shifting with the afternoon sun. She spoke about her hopes for the future, the places she wanted to see, the life she wanted to build, and the freedom she had longed for. The rancher listened quietly, offering encouragement and support without ever imposing his own ideas or expectations. "You're stronger than you realize," he said softly, "and you'll find your way, step by step like we did here." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had taught her that freedom was not just about removing chains. It was about reclaiming trust, rebuilding confidence, and believing in one's own strength. As the day passed, they continued to explore small parts of the ranch, allowing her to move freely and interact with the animals. She stroked the horses, fed the chickens, and felt a deep connection with life once again. Each interaction reinforced her newfound sense of autonomy and joy. By evening, the desert sky was painted in shades of gold and deep purple, the air cool and serene. They returned to the edge of the ranch, where the fence had once bound her. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the spot where her chains had been, reflecting on the journey she had undergone. The fear, the pain, and the uncertainty were still there in memory, but they no longer held power over her. She was free, fully and completely. The rancher stood beside her quietly, giving her space to reflect. "Freedom," he said softly, "is not just about leaving the chains behind. It's about knowing that you can make choices for yourself, that your life is yours to live." She nodded, understanding the depth of his words. She had been given not only physical freedom, but the chance to reclaim her life, step by step, guided by someone who respected her and treated her with patience and dignity. As night fell, they built a small fire and sat together, watching the stars twinkle above the vast desert landscape. The woman spoke quietly about her dreams, her hopes, and the new life she intended to build. The rancher listened, silently proud of the journey she had taken and the courage she had shown. Before resting for the night, the woman looked at him and said softly, "I never thought I would feel this free. I never thought someone would help me without expecting anything in return." "You earned it," he replied gently. "And sometimes, helping someone is about patience, trust, and quiet kindness. You trusted when it was hard, and that made all the difference." She smiled, a radiant expression of hope and relief. The chains were gone, her fear had lessened, and her spirit was restored. She realized that freedom was not a single moment, but a journey she had walked with patience, courage, and the guidance of someone who believed in her. As the night deepened and the desert grew quiet, she lay down on the blanket he had provided, her mind at peace for the first time in what felt like forever. The rancher remained nearby, vigilant but silent, knowing that the most important act he could offer was continued presence and respect for her newfound autonomy. The story ended not with grand celebration or dramatic action, but with quiet resolution. The woman, fully freed, reclaiming her life and her choices. The rancher, humbled and fulfilled, having guided her with patience, trust, and kindness. Their journey together had transformed both of them, one into freedom, the other into the understanding that true help comes from respect, empathy, and unwavering patience. The desert stretched endlessly before them, full of possibilities and new beginnings. And in that quiet, starlit world, the woman walked freely, her spirit unbound, carrying with her the lessons of trust, courage, and the gentle power of human kindness.